Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for some of you. Welcome to the webinar, Why Saint Francis Will Join the Climate Strikes. Thank you so much for joining. So to begin, we would like to start with a little prayer. In honor to Saint Francis, we will read a part of the Canticle of the Creatures. So to begin, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, Amen. The Canticle of the Creatures. Most high, all-powerful, good Lord, yours is the praise, the glory, and the honor, and every blessing. To you alone, most high, do you belong, and no one is worthy to speak your name. Praise be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially the brother Son, who is the day through whom you bring us light, and he is lovely, shining with great splendor, for he heralds you most high. Oh, praise and bless my Lord. Thank him and serve him humbly but grandly. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Today, we are going to begin the webinar with our panelists. So the first panelist is Fray Rufino Lim. Fray Rufino is he's a Franciscan from South Korea. He joined the Order of the Friars Minor in 1988. He serves as the assistant in the FM JPIC, Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Office in Rome. He has been JPIC animator since 2015, working in the OFAM JPIC office from 3 years now. Welcome, Fray Rufino, and thank you so much for your presentation today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Okay, I'd like to begin. I'd like to do my presentation with my some of my slides. Okay. The theme, the topic that I was given is the justice. What is justice and peace from the Franciscan perspective, which was not easy for me to prepare the presentation, but I hope I could tell you something about this. So first, I'd like to begin with our Constitution, the first article of our constitutions of the Friars Minor. It defines our identity as a Franciscan brother in today's world. And the first article, the two items of the first article goes like this. The order of Friars Minor is a fraternity. Basically, it is a fraternity. It is not a group of individuals. It is a fraternity, life in a fraternity in which the friars follow Jesus Christ and dedicate themselves totally to God. And the second article goes like, the friars are bound to lead a radical evangelical life. So this is a fraternity that lives a radical evangelical life. It gives 5 verbs to define the life of Franciscan brother. The first, to live in a spirit of prayer and in a fraternal relationship. Secondly, offer witness of penance and minority. Thirdly, announce the good news to the world. And the number 4 and 5 are very important to define our identity, our mandate to live the values of JPIC. We are supposed to preach reconciliation, peace, and justice by our own deeds, and to show respect for creation. So we can see what it means, how important it is for us, justice and peace, and respect for creation. Now I'd like to begin with a couple of stories of Saint Francis. The first one is about a story. It's a story of an encounter of Saint Francis with a leper. It happened in 1205, somewhere outside the wall of Assisi. I like to call it as a prototype of the Franciscan experience that has become one of the decisive events for Francis. Francis had a very delicate sensitivity. We have to note that he is from a wealthy family, and he hated to meet lepers and their smells. And he wrote that meeting them was extremely disgusting. But after the experience of a civil war, imprisonment in Perugia, and physical illness after that, he happened to get close to one of them. Lepers were treated as a living dead at the time and officially excluded from the city of Assisi. But on that occasion, very unusually, he hugged the leper and kissed him, and more, he visited their residence and served them. I describe it as an experience in which one touches the afflicted and their wounds, and at the same time, one gets touched by their sufferings. Something happened at the time in the heart of Francis. So later he decided to stay with them, staying in their side, not among the citizens of Assisi. The second story of St. Francis I want to share is about his experience during his personal prayer in one of the abandoned churches around Assisi. It also happened in 1205. It is called San Damiano. Many biographies say that he heard a voice from the cross, which was, "Francis, go and repair my church, my house." Then he immediately started his mission that was actually repairing that church. I think it has the same format as the previous encounter. He touched the mystery of the cross, and at the same time, he was deeply touched by the suffering of God. The God abandoned and excluded in silence. Here we discovered the meaning of the goodness of God, or the God as the supreme goodness, the source of all good. I think this is what happened during these encounters. There are three persons in these stories: Francis the leper and the Christ. When he met, embraced the leper, kissed him, and worked for him, something extraordinary happened in his heart. He was in a struggle, looking for the meaning of his life after the horrible experience of war and imprisonment in Perugia. He saw the blood clash between the classes, human greed and social injustice, and I assume that he might have killed some of the enemy troops as well. He was in the darkness, feeling himself as a sinner. I believe that he saw the face of Christ on the cross in that of the leper, who was exactly representing Francis himself. These three persons have been overlapped at the same time on the same point. And the source of this mystical experience, which is very concrete and tangible, was God the Father as a supreme goodness, who is the justice and peace, him or herself. The word justice, this is a photo, by the way, of the brother Joseph Nangle from the United States. He now is taking part in the movement for against the immigration policy of the United States. The word justice or just appears in the writings of St. Francis 12 times. He expresses God as the only just one and says that we also have to live accordingly. But what does it mean? I want to tell you about the social context of the 13th century, the time of Francis. The social structure was very much fixed, and it was extremely difficult for people to move up to higher class. If you were born as one of the minority class, you cannot become a majoritas, mayores, the upper class. This is social inequality. The class system didn't only exist in the secular world, but also in the church and the religious communities. So if you're born in a noble family, then when you join a religious order like the Benedictines, etc., you live and are treated accordingly. It's because you know Latin and you are capable of learn, teach, and pray in Latin. So we can say that the individual freedom, liberty was not recognized or respected properly. But Francis started to accept all the candidates to his own, to this Franciscan order, from both minores and mayores, the lower class and the upper class. And he called them all as brothers and treated them equally. And he taught his brothers that anyone can pray and meditate even if one doesn't know Latin. I think this was a movement of democracy of spirituality. Regarding peace, we should note that it was a time of war. There was a continuous war either inside and outside Assisi. There was a severe war in between two classes of Assisi when he was around 20 years old or less. He also had fought along with his common people against the upper class of Assisi and also against the upper class people of Perugia. And he was imprisoned for a year. And there came the peace agreement in between the two classes of the city. And during the time of the Fifth Crusade, he even visited the Sultan, the Muslim side. And he made peace with him. And he started to greet every people, pace bene, peace and all good. So as a creature, the historic tradition inspired by the Franciscan movement of justice and peace, I can mention a few of them. This Franciscan movement that was initiated by Saint Francis was marked by these qualities. Every single creature, each being has its own unique dignity. Each person is inspired by the Spirit, not by the authority, human authority. And all are sisters and brothers. They are sisters and brothers with each other, and they are sisters and brothers of Jesus Christ. And by the way of his attitude towards every single candidate to the order, he upgraded their social status, either spiritually as well as socially. And he respected everybody's freedom and their individual quality. So it was the beginning of the democracy of spirituality as well as the mysticism in the Western world. And it resulted in Renaissance as a cultural liberalism, and in Reformation as a religious liberalism, and French Revolution as a political liberalism. So this is the format of the Franciscan Justice and Peace movement I'd like to propose. That first of all, there should be the realization of greedy ego in oneself as the root cause of all sins and darknesses. And one should confess as a sinner and to realize the mystery of Holy Trinity, because just like we have seen in case of Saint Francis, only by the just God, his poverty, his minority, his obedience, his charity, we can be purified. Our greedy ego can be resolved. And naturally, the result is the divine, unlimited divine respect for every single being and their freedom. So we also need to practice this respect, divine respect in our daily life. And as a result, concretely in our daily lives, we need to serve all beings freedom and liberty. This is the sense of Franciscan universal fraternity and our identity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fray Rufino. As a reminder for the people who are watching us, at the end of the webinar, at the end of the presentations, we will give some minutes for questions to any of the panelists. So right now we will go with the next presentation. The next presentation is from Fray Jacek Orsekowski. He's a friar, he's a Franciscan friar of Holy Name Province. Over the last 17 years, he has ministered at the multicultural parishes in North Carolina and Maryland. Currently, he works for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington in the area of parish community organizing and advocacy. He also serves on the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Animation Committee of the Franciscan Orders. So welcome, Fray Jacek, and you can start your presentation.
Well, peace and all good. Welcome to all of you. And Domenica, if you could switch to the first slide that I prepared. The question that I'm going to focus is on why would Saint Francis join the climate strikes? Given how much is at stake right now, we are facing the collapse of the life support system of our planet, an incredible, untold suffering of poor people. Saint Francis definitely would be participating in the climate strikes. He would be on the forefront because for Saint Francis, at the heart of his life and his mission was the gospel. And responding to the cry of the poor and care for common home is at the core of it. So right now we are looking at an image, a fresco from Basilica of Saint Francis of Assisi, and it shows a very important time, a moment in the conversion of Saint Francis. He was praying in the dilapidated chapel church of San Damiano, and all of a sudden he heard the voice speaking to him from the crucifix. "Francis, rebuild my house that is falling into ruin." And Francis got up on from his knees, and soon after he began rebuilding the church. Other people joined him, and when he finished, he said, "Well, was that it?" And he realized no, that the call was much deeper. And he recognized that to rebuild God's house is to rebuild the human family, the mystical body of Christ. And towards the end of his life, he recognized also that that call included rebuilding God's house that extends to all creatures, to Earth's community of life. And this is part of our mission. To follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, who came to bring the good news to the poor, liberty to captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year that would usher in a harmony within all of Earth's community of life. Now, a part of responding to that call for us means that we are called to follow in the footsteps of Jesus with 2 feet on the ground, charity and justice. And justice means asking questions about what is happening in our world, who's hurting the poor, and who's destroying the earth. What are some of not only the mechanism of our, what is it in our soul that does that, but what are the political, social, economic mechanisms? What are the causes and consequences? And also figuring out what can we do about it. That's part of this ongoing call to each one of us to rebuild God's house that is falling into ruin. Next slide, please. And there's another fresco from the life of Saint Francis, and what you see is the figure of Brother Sebastian in front of the city of Arezzo, who at that time was torn by conflict and violence. And you see to the left, St. Francis kneeling and praying. And over the city, there are demons flying, the demons of greed, of violence, of discord. And here, Brother Sebastian goes insert himself into the situation of conflict, violence between different factions. And it's an intervention of prayer, but at the same time, as Saint Bonaventure says in his autobiography of Francis, that the demons fled when the two groups of people sat down and rewrote statutes and kind of a legislation. They came to an agreement. So here we see a wonderful example of Franciscan advocacy that is not afraid to get into a conflict zone and to call and to help the demons to flee, the demons of indifference, of ecological destruction, of greed, and so on. And it's on the left, we have photos of some of our Franciscan communities in Guatemala participating in climate strikes. So this is a kind of contemporary version of continuing that wonderful Franciscan legacy. Next slide, please. This is what you're looking at is a photo from a Spanish-speaking newspaper in Archdiocese of Washington, featuring young students from Saint Francis International School. On September 20th, they participate in the climate strike. And just as Saint Francis preached the gospel and preached the gospel of justice, these children also were there to call adult to task. In his encyclical, Laudato Si, Pope Francis reminds us that following in the footsteps of Jesus, living out love, it involves engagement in civic and political life. Love, he says, love for society and commitment to the common good are outstanding expressions of charity, which affects not only relationships between individuals, but also macro relationships, social, economic, and political ones. So the conversion that Saint Francis was about was not just an individual conversion. He was trying to change the world and form the world so that it would reflect God's desire of goodness, of beauty. And when we as Franciscan-hearted people participate in the climate strike, it's a form of preaching the gospel. It's a form of calling others and ourselves to radical conversion. Please, next slide. Now, earlier on this year, the Franciscans from all over the world gather in Jerusalem for a meeting focused on justice, peace, and care for creation. And in that, we committed ourselves to collaborating with Global Catholic Climate Movement, to participating in global and local mobilization efforts for climate justice. Also, we wrote, challenged by the 2018 Plenary Council of the Order, we desire to dream and at the same time be prophets of hope, capable of proclaiming the gospel for the building of the kingdom, denouncing and fighting concrete situations of injustice and violence in our present world. This attitude will make us bear much fruit as followers of Francis. Next slide. So here is the photo of some of my brother Franciscans and young people from Saint Francis International School participating in the action. Again, this is a form of preaching the gospel. Preaching the gospel is not just about repeating what Jesus did or kind of saying prayers, but at the heart of the gospel is also action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world. Whenever we do that, we were living out the gospel. And the last thing I want to say is that in the Franciscan tradition, there is we speak about beauty, not only the beauty of God's creation, but beauty of actions, beauty of young people and older people working together across the world to build a world that is more just, more fraternal, trying to recreate. And that's a sign of God's presence. This is the path of beauty to which our tradition, the gospel, is calling us to. So it's a challenge, but it's a great privilege. So I want to encourage all of you to take an active role in the climate strikes and to walk together on this path of beauty, of transformation, of new life, so that we can be troubadours of hope. Peace.
Thank you so much, Jacek. So to continue with the presentations, we have our next invite, who is Dewey Sakayan. Dewey is a litigation lawyer by day and a climate activist by night. After project managing a relief mission in the aftermath of Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, Dewey started working on disaster management, climate change policy, and grassroots campaigning. She facilitated academic research, published policy briefs, participated at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change COP negotiations, sold premium electric vehicles via Telsa, and campaigned for the zero carbon bill through Generation Zero. As a young lawyer and activist, she is passionate about using her legal skills to properly enforce New Zealand's environmental commitments in court. Welcome, Dewey.
Morena, good morning, everyone. And pase bien. Let me share my screen so you guys can see my slides. Once I find it, 1 second. There we go. Fantastic. So I'd like to start off with my personal story in terms of how I started off in the climate change path and climate change activism. So what you see in front of you is a photo that my papa took. This photo was in Tacloban, Philippines. This photo was taken in 2013 after Super Typhoon Haiyan ravaged a whole city in the Philippines. This photo, I guess, was the start of my climate change journey, because it was when I knew that our Earth and our planet is really collapsing. That's when I knew that the real victims in climate change are not just the planet, but also the people, particularly these people right here. The photo isn't very good over here, but this is actually a photo of some mothers who survived the typhoon, and the children that you see in the photo are those who survived, but their parents didn't. And so what this little tent was supposed to do was to actually bring together people who have lost loved ones, and people who need love, and people who need care. And my family and I, we came to Tacloban, and we expected to help on the ground by way of, I guess, like giving giving relief goods. However, when we got there, we actually got a lot more. We got their stories, we got their truth. But also on top of that, for myself personally, I got a mission. And I always try to live by my mantra, which is that once you know, you are responsible. And this is something that I think a lot of, everyone, regardless of your political stripes or your religion, or whether you have a religion or not, you can actually understand. Once you know, you're responsible. But as Catholics, it rings more true for us because we are given reason. By God, we are gifted rationale. And so for us, we actually have to use that for good. And we are called to hear the cries of the earth and the cries of the poor by Pope Francis through his encyclical. But also on top of that, because we now know that our planet is in the brink of collapse, we are responsible to make it right. And so to hash on what Dame has already said, I have tried to put what I know into everything that I do, put what I know is needed in terms of change and my theory of change into action. And so one of the main things that I have been doing here in New Zealand is to lobby for the zero carbon bill. And we will touch on this later on and how it actually plays such a central part in terms of youth activism here in New Zealand and around the world, but also how I've been able to realize my mission as part of Laudato Si Generation here in New Zealand. And so I guess today we'll touch on why youth have been the driving force of climate action, both in the streets, in schools, and in politics. But I want to pose this question first. Why are the students striking? Right. This question was posed to me by one of the CEOs who I was with last week, the CEO of Air New Zealand, and he said, student striking isn't actually new, right? Back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, a lot of students have been rising up against political injustice and social injustice. So why are students, but particularly school students, a lot younger than those who we were used to before, striking now? And I think personally that it's more than just what people think, it's more than just teenage angst. It's more than just fear, and it's more than just wanting to be out of school. Students are coming out to the streets because of this. We know that socially and more so politically, we have governments who announce targets of action, but make no plan in actually implementing those actions. And so what happens is that we've got this cycle wherein nothing happens and we fail to actually meet the targets that was announced. And so we go into the cycle, right? Or I guess in societal terms, people have come out to the streets because they know internally that something is wrong. However, nothing is catalyzing them to actually make a plan or a strategy in doing something about it. And so what happens is that as a society, we also fail to make change. And so what I love so much is that, with the help of social media, of advocacy groups, of Franciscan brothers, there's that catalyst and there's that push for young people to come out on the streets. And this is what we've seen in New Zealand. This is just one photo, but globally, New Zealand had the second largest school strikes for climate, wherein 3.5% of our population turned out on the 27th of September. You may think that 3.5%, like, what is that? But do remember that New Zealand is potentially 1/4 people and 3/4 sheep and cows. And so 3.5% of our population is such a big deal. But also on top of that, the reason why it was so powerful that a lot of young people came out was because this strike wasn't actually just it wasn't just attended by students. This particular strike all around New Zealand was also attended by more than 3,000 businesses, their parents, adults who wanted to join, interfaith communities, as well as the indigenous people. I haven't got a photo. I haven't received permission from my friends to post their photos, but online you will see a whole lot of photos of our indigenous people in the Pacifica coming out to the streets as well and saying their truth. And why is that important? That's important because they are the minorities who are in the forefront of climate change. And so we see our part in Asia Pacific, we as Aotearoa in New Zealand see our part in Asia Pacific as leaders and not slow followers in this campaign. So as I said, New Zealand had the second biggest strike in the world, which was fantastic. But more so, I think that what was actually telling in this is that the youth have regained the power. But with power comes responsibility, and with power comes a more need to be knowledgeable, but also on top of that, to bring others with you along the journey. And so one of the main things that I really want to post, I know that I was called to talk about my experience as in Laudato Si Generation, and particularly in the strikes, but I want to go through a journey with you guys and actually post this question and tell you how I've been going through my journey as a Laudato Si Generation animator in New Zealand as an ally, or in Māori, homie. Māori, by the way, is the indigenous language of New Zealand. So, let's go through this together. Who are your allies, right? Where you are, who are your allies? And I know we've just heard from two fantastic friars who talked about, the gospel and how turning out to the streets with the students is a way of preaching that gospel and practicing it. And so if you answer who are your allies with the people around you, then that's fantastic. But again, maybe a hidden question within this is, can you be an ally, right? And who else can you pull to be an ally to children and to an ally of the world? As Fray Jacek said before, the mission, the Franciscan mission, is to rebuild the house that is in ruins because it is in the collapse. Because we see the collapse of the life support of our planet. We see the collapse of our planet, which is our life support. And so one of the main things that I really want to touch on is the fact that students, but also the young people nowadays, want to see structural change. They want to see practicalism, but also on top of that, they just want people who can listen to their struggles. They want a space to actually say what they want to say. They want a platform to voice what they want to voice. And for us as Laudato Si Generation animators, that's one of the main things that we can actually amplify. We try to amplify it not just on the streets, but more so by direct lobbying. And so this is a photo of a few students in New Zealand who I've been working with to lobby the Bishop of Auckland. And so in this photo, you'll see 3 students holding up signs. These 3 students are leaders in a school, an all-girls Catholic school, which is actually just in front of the Bishop's house and the Bishop's office. But what was interesting was that this was actually their first time meeting the Bishop. And on top of that, the backstory in terms of this photo is that after I returned from World Youth Day Panama, I have been very active in trying to set a meeting up with Bishop, his name is Bishop Pat, to try and lobby him to actually, one, encourage him to join the climate strikes, 2, to encourage him to actually make climate change more central in Catholic school curriculum. But also the third ask is to inspire the rest of the priests, the rest of the congregation, the rest of the church in New Zealand to actually be more aware of our responsibility to act and to care for our common home. And what was interesting was that it took me such a long time to try get a meeting with Bishop Pat because he's such a busy man. But as soon as these students came on board and they said, "Hey, we want to lobby Bishop Pat with you," Bishop Pat straight away said yes. And so that was fantastic. And I'd like to think that Bishop Pat is our ally. However, how does that actually translate to who will listen and who will actually turn up? And there's still a lot of room for improvement, which I think everyone in this call, could do, has a part in. And one of those would be to actually lobby those around you, to encourage them. And I say lobby because I'm an activist, but for you, it's just encouraging them via talking to them. Talk to the people in power. How can we actually have structural change within the church to make sure that we are supporting these students? One of the main things that they wanted to do was to actually, one, not have any punishments for students who wanted to come to strikes, because in their schools, they weren't allowed to go and attend the strikes. In their schools, their principal had said that if you turn out to the strikes, that would be 1 day absent. Or if you turn out to the strikes and you talk about the strikes to other students, then you are going to be punished as well via detention. And so for them, they were like, hold on, we're called by Pope Francis to hear the cries of the earth and the cries of the poor. We're called, our faith teaches us to, work alongside vulnerable people. So why is coming out to strikes such a bad thing? And so I think that struggle isn't just for the students to solve. That struggle is actually for all of us to solve. That struggle is something that we need to talk within our church and say, okay, we know that this is our teaching, but how can we actually put that into action? And so after this meeting, we did have one group from Bishop Pat's office turn out and support the strikes. Some of them even marshaled for the school students. So as they were walking around the streets of New Zealand, they were, along the side, making sure that they were safe. So that was good. But also on top of that, we were put in touch to other people who were actually in charge of the Catholic school curriculum to try and insert more of Laudato Si's the teachings of Laudato Si and the teachings of Saint Francis in religious education. Another action, I guess, of where the youth's social license comes in, and our power is in this bill that we had lobbied. And so as a Laudato Si generation, I find that it's very important for me to practice what I preach, but also to be able to manifest in action what it is that we would need to create structural change. And one of the ways in which we found that was through the Zero Carbon Act. So the Zero Carbon Act was passed last week, Thursday, and it got royal assent on Wednesday this week. So it's very recent, and it's such a big win for New Zealand and for the youth of New Zealand, because it was actually the young people who created the legal blueprint of what the bill would look like. And there were some compromises. It's not perfect, but again, everything can be improved. And one of the ways in which we found the momentum of the school strikes very important is because if you go to the school strikes with the right reasons to act for climate change, then you can actually talk to the people around you about why you care about climate change. What are you fearful of? But also, what is that inner calling that's actually pushing you to turn out and support millions of people around and thousands of people who are going to be affected by climate change. And so this photo is of my friend Adam, who actually went to his grandparents to try and talk to them about his faith journey in acting on climate change, but more so the Zero Carbon Act. And so this little climate tea and talk session that he held in his grandparents' rest home was quite important, because these grandparents are actually part of the solution. A lot of people think that the climate problem is only going to be, only the young people are going to be affected by this, but it's not. It's a present problem. And so we're all part of the problem. We all need to be part of the solution. But also on top of that, these older people from the older generation, they're actually the ones that are politicians more likely to listen to. And so we find that it's very important to not just make climate change, a thing of the young people, a movement of young people, because it's not. We heard that from Fray Rufino, we heard that from Fray Jacek, but also we hear that from Pope Francis. Climate change is, our inner calling to protect our Earth. And so Adam here is from Dunedin, the South Island. He is part of the church over there. A few of us all around New Zealand started an interfaith community, a network of interfaith communities who turn out to climate strikes, but also lobby within our church. And so he's actually part of the Presbyterian Church, but because of Laudato Si generation, I've been able to kind of, give him some resources as to why the faith communities have a massive role to play in climate change. And so I guess to conclude, what I wanted to say is that we can all fix it, right? Yes, our planet and our life support is in the brinks of collapse, but at the end of the day, we have the power, the mandate to actually solve it, to solve this problem, and to bring others with us. And so I think that all action must happen on all levels. I think that structural change, yes, is hard, but it's mandatory. Structural change, not just in the international sphere, via the COP negotiations that are happening in a couple of weeks' time, so we all need to pray for that. The national level, such as the laws, and the local level, such as, say, for example, regulations on transport, but also on the school level, because these students need us. These students, they actually want to know more about Laudato Si, but perhaps because of the structures that they have in their curriculum, or even the people that they have within their, in their schools or in their church, aren't the ones who are pushing for this change. So we all have a responsibility to fix it together, but to lobby for that to people who can make those changes. And if not, then be that change, right? I know that I may not work specifically in the church. I work as a lawyer, but that doesn't mean that I am removed from the church. That means that I am a homie, I'm an ally with them, trying to lobby the bishop to actually have these, these teachings in their everyday lives. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you for listening to my speech. Thank you so much for going into a journey with me, even within the last 10 minutes of really finding out our place as part of this movement that is either Laudato Si generation or the climate strikes.
Thank you so much, Dewey, for your presentation. So to continue, I'd like to raise again this call to action for November 29 and December 6th. That will be the dates of the next global climate strikes. So I guess with all this inspiration that we just heard, we're ready to join. And just to show you a little bit more about Laudato Si generation, I'm going to show you the website where you will be able to find different stories, different news, also resources that will help you to participate in these strikes. And it's fine if you cannot go to street. Every single action matters. You can have like a prayer service, a moment of silence in solidarity with people striking. You can do that at home, at your work, at school. Any action, it's important. So this is our website, Laudato Si Generation. Everyone is invited to join. And again, the next one will be on November 29 and December 6th. And November 29, it's a very special date because it's the 40th anniversary of Saint Francis, named as Saint Patron of those who promote ecology. So what a better way to celebrate Saint Francis than taking action, make us heard, make us listen. So everyone is invited to join. And just a little bit, here's a resources page that you will find in the Laudato Si Generation website. Every resource is free. You can use, download, and share it with your network, community, friends, etc. You have guides on how to support climate strikes, like sample emails to start this contact with your pastor, bishop, etc., and different things that you can use for your strike or action. So that's what I wanted to show. And we go to the last part of the webinar, which is the questions. So if you have any question, you can send in the chat box. And if you want someone specific from the 3 panelists to answer this question, please write there. So let's take like a couple of minutes to write the questions, and then we can start with that. Yeah, regarding the dates of the strikes, I see this question from Carol. Yeah, it's these 2 dates, November 29 and December 6th. Lately, the climate strikes movement, the global movement, has been using 2 dates, 2 Fridays for the global manifestations. So this time is December 6th and November 29. And right now we were pushing a little bit more within Laudato Si generation than November 29th because of it's the same date of the celebration of Saint Francis, and also our Franciscan brothers in Assisi will be doing a little strike in representation and in celebration of Saint Francis. So that's why we've been pushing that in the website, but we are updating that. And then, yes, we will send the recording after the webinar for those who weren't able to join. And here's a question, I guess is for Dewey. It's about loving. And the question is from Mary, and says, I'm also loving my Archbishop, and I was also told he's too busy. I am taking inspiration to reach out to the youth to our local Catholic school and see if they want to join. Any advice on this, Dewey?
That's a very good question. And thank you very much, Mary, for showing this. For asking this. So within Laudato Si Generation's outreach team, we've actually started an open letter to the bishops. And so there are 2 things that you could do. You could either, 1, go straight to the students and say, hey, let's lobby the Archbishop together. I've tried to do that, as I've already said, and it wasn't until these students came to my help that I actually got a meeting with Bishop Pat. Again, if that doesn't work, the second would actually be an open letter. This open letter that we have been trying to draft in Laudato Si Generation outreach team, I'm pretty sure that we could share that, Dome, or I may be wrong. So yeah, if we can share that, then we can send it to Dome to share to everyone. This open letter, we've started drafting. I've used parts of it in my conversations with Bishop Pat, and it was actually quite fantastic because it was a rehashing of the Laudato Si, of the teachings of Laudato Si. I just wanted to touch on the second question right after that, and it was about whether it's illegal for students to strike. So striking is not illegal. So let me rephrase that so it's not double negative. So participating in strikes is legal. However, my sharing a while ago was very specific to particular schools in New Zealand who are not wanting their students turning up to climate strikes. And so that is a problem. It's a problem because I think that, 1, it's very limiting in terms of people's liberties, but also I've always believed that the best way of learning is actually doing something, of being a part of something. And these students, they've got a real struggle in terms of seeing belongingness, but more so for the students of this all-girls Catholic school, actually seeing gospel play in practice. And that's something that I think, as what Fray Jacek said a while ago, striking with students is actually a form of teaching the gospel, right? Of preaching the gospel. So that's a real problem that we're trying to address, trying to lobby the senior management team. But we need people's help. And so if you know anyone, if you know that this is a problem in a local school, then maybe a person who have a connection to a principal or a teacher, and find those allies, find those homies, and try to nudge them through your conversations. Sorry, there's also a question on how to engage elderly. there's no names, but I can perhaps say my 2 cents. So how we engage the elderly was firstly by actually getting in touch with who are the elders that are around us. So this campaign that we ran called Elbow Your Elders was a way in which we could kind of elbow very lightly the people who we look up to within our families. And so whether that's our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles, and elbowing them in terms of saying, hey, guess what? Last week I turned out to the strikes, and this is the reason why I turned out to the strikes. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create structural change via changing a law in New Zealand or creating a law in New Zealand. So that's one way in which we engage the elderly. Another that I've tried was to actually post the Laudato Si generation logo in our parish bulletin. So I posted it and I said, join Laudato Si generation. I put up a QR code in terms of the Laudato Si website. And a lot of people, had questions about it, right? Ask your parish priest, can I have 2 minutes after the service to actually talk about Laudato Si? And so that's another way of engaging elderly.
Thank you, Dewey. And here's a question that I think maybe Fray Rufino or Fray Jacek can respond. And it's a little related with the next one, which says, advice on using other terminology than Laudato Si to be more inclusive of other faiths and to be more clear on our goals to people who don't understand that terminology.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. When we were promoting, trying to get more young people to participate in the climate strike on the 20th, we use inviting people to an event focused on climate, to address climate crises. Yeah, but I nothing at this particular point comes to my mind in terms of Laudato Si, but I agree that we need to broaden it and speak about climate, climate justice, and then kind of re-articulate some of the core messages of Laudato Si. And also just want to say, I want to affirm those young people and older who don't give up on the church and to advocate. This is extremely important. Don't be bashful. Evangelize. If you have to evangelize the priests, bishops, archbishops, and the church needs to be evangelized in order to evangelize. So you're doing a favor. And be courageous and persistent.
Thank you, Fray Jacek. And the last question, because of time. So how do you present the spirituality of Saint Francis to a mixed group of teens and adults? Maybe Fray Rufino, can you help us with this last question?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, how to present the spirituality of Saint Francis to a group of teens and adults?
I don't know. Maybe we could use some stories. There are tons of stories. There are tons of stories of St. Francis regarding care for creation, justice, and peace, just like Jacek and myself just shared. One of the stories, I mean, there are so many cute stories, talking with the birds and the fishes. And one of them that I found yesterday was really interesting, that at the funeral of St. Francis, his brothers recalled that Francis used to say that if I read it, if I ever speak to the emperor, like the president or I don't know, the king or queen of today's world, I will beg him for the love of God and by their entreaties to enact a written law forbidding anyone to catch our sister larks or do them any harm. So it's like a legislative petition at the time, 800 years ago. And it goes on. Likewise, all mayors of cities and lords of castles and villages should be bound to oblige people each year on the nativity of the Lord to scatter wheat and other grain along the roads outside towns and villages so that all the birds, but especially my sister Lark's sister, may have something to eat on such a solemn feast. So the care for creation is, or universal fraternity, is not only ideological for St. Francis, it's his life. He actually felt the solidarity and fraternity along with all beings, not only the human beings or animals, but with the climate, with the air, wind, stones, mountains, etc., etc. Non-living beings as well. So he felt the living presence of the Lord in all the beings in every single corner of creation. I think the stories would be a great help to get in touch and act along with other groups than ours.
Thank you so much, Fray Rufino, and thank you so much to everyone who joined today in this webinar that why St. Francis will join climate strikes. And as we talked and listened to the friars and Dewey, he will definitely be there with us. So again, the open invitation to join the strikes or any other action, because every single action matters. And thank you so much for joining. At the end of the day, or maybe on Monday, we will share the recording. And I see some of you are asking for the presentations. We will share them too. Thank you so much, Fray Rufino, Fray Jacek, and Dewey. Have a nice rest of the day. Thank you.